A patriotic call from Gaborone, Botswana, where the African Economic Conference is underway. Amidst global uncertainty, there is a push by Africa's development partners to lift the continent out of poverty.
First is to establish the importance of coming together. Really key. We're institutions all trying to do the same thing on the continent, but often we work in parallel. We sort of are in our own silos. So one imperative here is that we're establishing a new voice, which is African institutions working on the African continent must come together and tackle the challenges together. Second is where it's happening, Botswana. It really is important to register what's just happened in Botswana this past month with the elections and the peaceful transition of power. I think what we're trying to also feature here is that Africa needs this kind of strong governance systems to be able to build a foundation for development.
Botswana is still in jubilation as the country welcomes a new president, Duma Boko, who says he's upbeat about seeing Africa take a leading role on the global stage.
I hope at the end of this conference you'll have reignited the passion. You would have fueled, augmented and deepened democracy at the very least. But that you'll also have inspired us to more action geared at lifting our people from poverty and raising our continent to take its rightful place as a leader.
With 3 days of dialogue amongst actors across the African continent, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is hopeful that solutions will be developed to solve Africa's challenges.
People hear the reform of the global financial architecture, they hear challenges of climate, issues of debt. How do we come to find solutions? And this, it cannot not be done by one institution, but let's come together with other governments and try to debate and find something that can make more sense.
The African Development Bank is amongst leading financial institutions calling for a reform to the international financial architecture.
And the reason for that is very clear. We are seeing a lot of multipolarization in the global economy. We are seeing a lot of talk about reforms in the global economy. And we are seeing a lot of challenges and continuous global shocks that continue to buffet African economies, making African growth to be going up and down all the time. So we want to look at homegrown solutions that Africans can come up with in order to be able to address the major challenges that face Africans. I would say that Africa has no business importing wheat from Ukraine. Simply doesn't have any business doing that, because Africa, like I have said, have 65% of the remaining arable land in the world. Africa has a teeming population of youths hungry to be engaged in productive ventures. So that is why in the African Development Bank we have the Agripreneur program, we have the Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zones program, SAPZs, through the initiatives of President Akinwumi Adesina, that will be able to now bring investments to Africa's youth to harness those potentials in Africa so that Africa can feed itself and feed the world. So my concern would not be why is the wheat value chain, the wheat supply chain, broken by the war. My concern would be why is it that Africa, who should be feeding the world, is doing the reverse, importing food. And we have done some work with, for example, in Ethiopia, and they have been able to move from food self-dependence in terms of wheat dependence on foreign imports and so on to an exporter of wheat today in 4 years of investments, because they focused on our technologies for agricultural transformation in Africa, a TAT program brought by President Akinwumi Adesina, and we can, within 4 years, be able to move from food self-insufficiency to a food exporter. It is possible. And like I said in my statement this morning, Africa can be the leader of the world in feeding the world, not only feeding itself.
In wrapping up, you talked about investment climate should be supported by good governance structures and atmosphere. Ghana is going for their elections. Obviously, investors are doing the wait and see approach to see if it will be peaceful so they can invest more. I'm sure the AFDB is also hoping that that process will be smooth. What message do you have to Ghanaians and the business community as the country goes into, the elections?
The message I will have for all African countries, not just for Ghana, is that there is no substitute for political stability, and there is no substitute for good macroeconomic policy management in countries. These two things, when you get them right, reduces the cost of capital, increases the flow of foreign direct investments, portfolio investments, and even diaspora investments into the country. And then the whole cry about lack of fiscal space will fizzle away. So like we can see here in this country of Botswana that have successive political transitions without skirmishes, we can see its per capita income at over 7,600 US dollars per person. And that is because there is good governance and stability. Capital needs a stable environment, just like you and I.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to go to places that there's uncertainty. So let's reduce that uncertainty and be able to drive down the perceived risk that causes African countries to pay huge premiums in terms of risk premiums in the global market because of political instability and lack of predictability in the macroeconomic policy environment in Africa.
Conveners are hopeful that this year's Africa Economic Forum will help the continent come out stronger and more united to push for Africa's development. And in the last 3 days, there's been conversations around lifting Africa out of poverty and securing Africa's economic future amidst rising uncertainty. That's been the focus for the 2024 Africa Economic Conference happening in Gaborone, Botswana, where we're bringing you this conversation. Issues around the transformation of the continent is top on the agenda as experts have been dialoguing on ways to best move the continent forward. But is Africa indeed rising, and how can we get there faster? I want to bring in now Mavis Owusu-Jemfi, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Africa Center for Economic Transformation. Mavis, thanks so much for your time and thanks for joining us here in Gaborone, Botswana, in our makeshift studio. But I want us to start off by talking about the uncertainties confronting Africa. Very uncertain times for the continent, isn't it?
So Africa has navigated a lot of continental and geopolitical uncertainty. So in terms of its impact on Africa, yes, it's high, but we've always got to ask ourselves, why is the impact of geopolitics so high on us? The impact of the Ukraine war is high on us because it's affected the amount of development assistance that we are having. But the thing that worries me the most is the impact of the Ukraine war on food security on the continent. Why are we a net importer of food? This is Africa. Okay, we have land mass that we are not farming, we have unutilized opportunities. So why is a war in Europe having such a huge impact on access to food? Why is it really driving food insecurity? So we've always got to look home. I always say, every country in the world is navigating complex geopolitics. But if that country, is transformed, if that country has the capacity to withstand shocks, if that country can feed its people, if that country can negotiate effectively with the world, that country will do better. So the question for us is, what do we need to do to ensure we withstand these shocks much better in the future?
And you agree that this is not the first time we're talking about the uncertainties confronting the continent, but many are now focusing on the 2024 Africa Economic Conference, which is now focusing on this theme of moving the continent out of poverty amidst the rising uncertainty. But is this just a talk show, or you believe that the 2024 Africa Economic Conference has something to do with the transformation of the continent?
what I find really powerful about the conference this year, and actually we're hearing it more and more in other spaces, is a conversation about what we need to do in Africa. So it started with President Boko, when President Boko challenged us to think through real solutions for the continent rather than just discussing economic models or economic theory. That's what he challenged us with. And in the last couple of days, there's been conversations around how do we build our regional value chains? How do we make the AFCFTA a reality? How do we support countries to implement the protocols? How do we deal with cross-border challenges? How do we deal with people movement? How do we address infrastructure challenges, be it power, be it transport? So we are really looking at the nuts and bolts of what it will take for us to really transform our economies, what it will take for us to add value to our products. How do we shift from the export of raw materials to value addition? And the conversations are very much around tangibles. It's not the usual theory. We've just had a fantastic presentation by the Minister for Science, Technology and Innovation from Uganda, who has given us what it takes to build an industry, the skills you have to invest in, the infrastructure you have to invest in, the technology you have to invest in. But most importantly, what I loved about the minister's presentation was she said, we have started building electric buses for Uganda, okay? Now, I want to know who in Africa is going to supply me with EV batteries? Who in Africa is going to supply me with tires? Who in Africa? So the Uganda is not just thinking about the car they are producing, they are thinking about where the sources of other inputs are going to come from. And they are not looking at outside Africa. They are asking at this conference, which of the other countries will be able to work with us so that we can build electric buses to serve our country. Now imagine if Uganda is successful in building these electric buses. You and I are from Ghana, right? Couldn't we benefit from a really powerful bus network in our country? And if it's electric, isn't it even better?
But let's talk about intra-Africa trade, which is hovering somewhere below 16%. It's become a challenge for the continent to move forward in terms of expanding its markets and trading amongst itself, isn't it? Because the figures don't look too good for us. But how do we ensure that we get more African countries to trade amongst themselves so that, you know, the likes of the African Continental Free Trade Area could be given a further boost?
Two things we need to talk about, okay? When we talk about intra-Africa trade, we talk a lot about the formal trade that is captured through the statistics. That is not going up as fast as we want it to go. And as I said earlier on the panel, the reason it is not going up is because our infrastructure is not connected effectively. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we are not producing the things we need to produce to trade with each other effectively. The third thing is we are not implementing the protocols we've signed. So we've talked about movement of people, but it's difficult to move people, you know. As a Ghanaian, you came to Botswana, saw how hard it was to get into Botswana. So, you know, we need to tackle these issues. And I'd like to go back to the point that President Boko made at the beginning of the conference, where he said, let's be very, very clear in articulating what needs to be done. So, movement of people, free movement of people, okay, so that we can actually work and trade with each other without the burdens of visa. Infrastructure, thinking through infrastructure of connectivity, okay, so that we can actually trade effectively, okay, and asking ourselves, how do we work together to build the products and the services that we need on the continent and over time can export? If we can do that, we will start to see the formal figures increase. But the thing that we are not capturing effectively is the informal trade that goes on this continent. We do a lot of trading across borders informally, but we don't have the systems to capture the data. So I think the data we currently have actually underrepresents the trade that we are doing amongst ourselves, even though I think we can make the informal trade so much more robust. The numbers don't capture that, and that's a loss.
Broadly speaking, 2024 has not, been a smooth year for many African countries. The outlook is pointing out that looking at the current trend of development and also the international financial architecture, many African economies may not develop in the next 100 years or so. That's challenging to many of the actors who are working for transformation such as yours, isn't it?
So there are two things we have to look at. I suppose my question is, why does the global financial architecture have to drive our progress into high income? Africa's finance does not come just from the global financial architecture. It comes from a myriad of sources, okay? We have domestic resources, okay? We have our pension funds that, as we heard earlier this week, is being invested elsewhere, not on the continent. We have taxes that we are losing through illicit financial flows. We have what else? We have so many sources of finance that we can pull together, okay? Multilateral development banks are one component of that global financial architecture, but the financing we need is so much bigger and so much broader. So for me, it's about access to finance, but most importantly, it's about what we use the finance to do. It's about laying the foundations to invest effectively to transform our economies. So at Asset, we are always talking about how is a country diversifying its economy? How are you adding value to your economy? If you are not adding value to your raw materials, it's not going to work, okay? You will continue to export raw materials, and as soon as there's a global financial crisis, or as soon as there's a global crisis of any form, you will be knocked, and it will take you a long time to rebound. You will struggle to rebound because you don't have the diverse base of products that you are trading with the rest of the world. So we can talk a lot about the money, but I think we need to start with some basic fundamentals, okay? Number one, what are the 2 or 3 value chains that we are going to invest in regionally, nationally, to ensure that we are actually building an industrial base. We are creating jobs, decent jobs for our people. We are increasing the incomes of our people, okay? That's the first question we have to ask. 2, we've got to ask ourselves, are we using our money effectively, okay? Is our government spending our money effectively? Are they spending it on the right things, on energy, on infrastructure, on skills? Are they investing in the right ways? You can say I'm investing in skills, but if you're investing in skills that is not contributing to an industry that you're trying to build, it's a waste of money. Okay, so are we targeting our investments in a way that supports the transformation plan that we have in place? Okay, if we can demonstrate that we're doing these 2 things, the third thing is, am I working with my neighbors to maximize the impact that I am having? Are we having a division of labor? Am I trying to do everything? So for example, if we want to go back to the old days of Akosombo textiles, okay? We don't have to worry about northern Ghana growing cotton. No, it's not necessary. We have the cotton for. Let's have an agreement with them. Let's buy their cotton, and let's focus our energy on the production of cotton and the production of textiles. Let's specialize and let them specialize, because that specialization will enable us to trade across Africa, but most importantly, it will enable us to trade with the world, because we will be competitive with the world. So if we start to put these fundamentals in place, then the concern you have that it's going to take us 100 years to get to middle income status, it's not a concern. If, however, We don't. We are not intentional. We are not focused, okay? And we're trying to do everything across the board in a substandard way. Then I think even 100 years is being optimistic.
Let's talk about the debt crisis because, many African countries such as Ghana are going through that challenging period of a sovereign debt crisis. In fact, we still have some outstanding external debt to deal with. We're running an IMF bailout program of about $3 billion. But how do we get out of the woods faster? I guess that's the concern for many actors across the continent.
So as I said, we don't believe that debt is bad. Okay?
Right.
Non-productive debt is a problem. Okay? So if you borrow and that debt is not productive, then you have a problem. Or even if you borrow and your borrowing terms does not align with what you are using, the timeline for what you're using the debt for, you have a problem. So look, however we might think of debt, we know that when we look at data across the continent and we look at how countries have used debt, it's everything from 20% efficiency to 100% efficiency. It's varying. So if we look at how, and if we put aside the concern on, efficiency of use of debt, we've also got to ask ourselves around the timeline. So let me give you a case in point. I borrow a 10-year debt to build a road, okay? The return on that road or the return on that infrastructure is going to take me 20 years to realize, but I start paying back for it straight away, okay? And at the end of 10 years, I should have paid it all through. Unfortunately, I haven't realized properly the return on that investment. Of course, I'm going to be in trouble. It's really that simple. And on top of it, if I'm also paying a premium for that debt. So the issue that we have at the moment is, yes, a number of countries have a liquidity crunch. A number of countries like ours has gone into insolvency and we have challenges. And we are not out of the woods, far from it. But this is why it's even more important that we are fiscally responsible, okay? And we invest right, we invest properly, and we focus our investment. It's so important because right now, because we are not out of the woods, we've got to ask ourselves, how can we make sure that the little money we are bringing in, or the little money we have, is actually working for us, or will work for us in the medium to long term, even if it doesn't give us the quick return we want, okay? So if you're talking about industries and you come to me and you tell me that you're going to build 30 industries in the next 5 years, not realistic, is it? So this is the time when we really need to be focused. We need to make sure we pick where we want to transform. We invest in it. We invest in the skills. We invest in the infrastructure. We really focus our energies around this so that this sector starts not just to make money for us, but also starts to create jobs that enables us to broaden our tax base for our people to pay taxes. We can't keep squeezing the same people. We've got to broaden our tax base. But we can only realistically broaden our tax base if we are enabling our people to access decent jobs. And to be able to access that decent job, government has responsibility for creating the environment, ensuring the regulations are in place, ensuring that it is investing in the necessary public goods through skills, infrastructure, etc., and working with businesses to invest, but also hold businesses to account. We don't want businesses to invest and not pay our people decently. So make sure that we have the systems to hold businesses to account in how they invest in our economy.
Right. And then there's the issue about taxes as well.
But hold on a second. Every government has to tax its citizens, okay? But you need to tax people properly. You can't keep taxing the same people over and over and over again and not investing the taxes in a way where you broaden your tax base, okay? So the issue is, yes, we need to increase our taxes, but are we actually doing two things? One, are we collecting taxes effectively. Okay, so are we collecting taxes in a way like, digitalization should make collecting taxes a lot easier. You don't need a human being who will collect formal and informal tax simultaneously. We can digitalize it, make it more cost effective. Two, are we broadening the tax base? Are we looking at our whole tax base? So Ghana, one of the issues that we've talked about in Ghana, and a lot of policy institutes have talked about, is property taxes. We can actually broaden our tax base ridiculously with property taxes. Why have we not looked properly at property taxes and put a system in place to broaden our tax base? So that is really important, broadening your tax base. And then investing it in such a way that you are actually generating jobs, you are generating additional economy, so that, how do I put it, you are increasing the size of the cake to tax, so the burden on a handful is not too high. Okay, and then finally, spend it wisely. Because if you are collecting taxes and you are not spending it wisely, as a taxpayer, it doesn't work for me. So I think, look, Afrobarometer recently, their recent survey said that Ghanaians still believe in democracy. However, they've lost confidence in their leaders. Okay, so the issue is not democracy. The issue is not right of voice. The issue is a belief that the democratic system we have and the governance system we'll have will deliver for us. Okay, so the challenge, I would say, Ghana and a number of countries are struggling with right now is to assure its people that it will govern effectively, but govern in a way that benefits the common good, not a handful of people. So, recently, the work that the two Nobel Prize economists have been talking about a lot is, how can the middle classes drive change? If the middle classes have a social contract which is focused on what I can get out of the system, it's not the common good. So we've got to find a way in which our governance is serving the common good. And the common good, I think, on the continent of Africa is really simple. Create decent jobs. Create an environment for us to invest. Enable us to gain access to quality education and skills that will enable me to enter the market and be seen as a viable candidate. Ensure I have access to effective and adequate and affordable healthcare. I mean, these are basics. This is what you do to create the common good, of course, and let's not forget, treat me as equal. Give me my share of power, treat me as equal. This is just basic common good. If we don't have the common good at heart when we are governing a nation, then we only have the interest of a handful of people. And that is what is leading to a lot of the frustration we are seeing in our young people, and is leading to the, I don't like to call them riots, because riots are patronizing to our young people who are sharing their voice, but it's leading to the demonstrations and the agitations that are popping up around the continent.
It's also about the taxes, isn't it?